don't just go and reach out to a candidate after looking at their LinkedIn profile, because you don't get all of the information that you want to actually use in your reach out campaign from LinkedIn.
That's Vanessa Roth, and she's about to challenge everything you thought you knew about email outreach to candidates. In this episode, she shares her approach to crafting email campaigns that actually resonate with candidates. From uncovering hidden candidate information to thinking like a marketer, Vanessa shares the strategies that have transformed her sourcing game. You'll learn how to personalize your emails beyond just using a candidate's name.
I found that I have to give a good Google search for someone to find out things like, oh, wait, hold on, they also run this community, or maybe they wrote this book, or they were a guest on this blog, or they were a guest on someone's podcast that you could have listened to.
What email metrics you should be paying attention to.
Definitely open rates versus response rates, because then you know that your message is landing.
How to create engaging email content.
First of all, the big one, and also I was reading in this article today, it's your subject lines. You've got to make sure that you got your number of characters right.
Vanessa even reveals a counterintuitive email strategy that might surprise you.
You have to, as a recruiter, tell that candidate that this is the last email that you are sending them.
That's right. Vanessa explains why your last email in a campaign should actually be a breakup email, whether you're struggling with low response rates or looking to build a stronger pipeline. This episode is packed with actionable advice you can start implementing today. Let's dive into my conversation with Vanessa. So I always like to start by asking people to tell me a bit about their background and how they landed in talent acquisition. But with you specifically, I want to know how you ended up specializing in talent sourcing.
Excellent question. I always ask this one myself, to be honest, because no one went to university to study to be a recruiter, right? Everyone kind of fell into it, or as I heard recently on a podcast, they face planted into recruitment. I basically fell into recruitment because I like to eat, and I was broke. I had no money. I'd basically been traveling around the world. I'm a qualified teacher. I'd spent some time in London, had left London, had worked as a scuba diving instructor in Southeast Asia, in East Africa, and literally one morning kind of woke up and I was like, well, I think it's time to go home now. And that was about 12 years of traveling and living outside the country. And I returned home with not a cent to my name. So I literally went for an interview at a recruitment agency trying to get into adult education, because I thought, I could still be a teacher, but it doesn't always pay that well here in South Africa. And quite enjoyed working with adults. I went for an interview and they offered me the job, and I actually said, no, thanks, I'm all right. I'll hang out and wait. And a week later, I realized that no one else was really knocking down my door for me to do anything for them. And I had to live with my parents again, and I was in my 30s and I really needed some cash. So yeah, I kind of went for it. And the rest is history. 2 years in agency, then did 10 years internal. And now I've been running my own business for just over 5 years. So it's haven't worked all over the place, haven't had many different roles, but I've experienced kind of the length and breadth of what recruitment can offer you, which has been great.
Yeah, and
the
I'm
talent
sure
sourcing piece. Okay, let me explain the talent sourcing piece as well before I forget. Rona, to be honest with you, that was out of pure desperation, because here I was internal. I was at the same company for 10 years. It was a tech company. And I realized I wasn't finding these people on LinkedIn and local job boards. So I had to start thinking differently. And it was really weird, because being stuck in South Africa, talent sourcing wasn't a thing. And I'm going back 10 years now. It really and truly wasn't a thing. And I actually taught myself how to source talent on the likes of GitHub and Stack Overflow, and how to write Boolean and how to X-ray, all from YouTube. Because, back then there wasn't much happening. I was an avid follower of all the SourceCon conferences. So whenever there was a conference happening, it was hugely expensive for me to try and get over there from South Africa to the US side. I'd sit on that hashtag and I'd learn as much as possible, even to the point of where people would say, hey, Vanessa, you're very chirpy. Are you at the conference? Can we meet up for a drink in the next break, or see you for a coffee or something like that? And I had to explain, actually, no, I'm sitting on the other side of the world. So yeah, that was a lot of how I learned, was listening to these conferences, watching YouTube, and doing all of those interesting things. So yeah, it was a journey, but it was great. I absolutely love it.
Amazing, amazing. So we're in 2024. Everyone talks about sourcing on social media and just all of these modern things. Why do you think email campaigns are still a relevant and powerful way to source talent?
So it's really interesting because this is actually one of the courses that I train people on, because there's so many different aspects to recruitment. And then you can even say there's so many different aspects to talent sourcing. So when it comes to my talent sourcing philosophy, I literally have 3 pillars. And these are the 3 pillars you have to get right. Doesn't matter what your job title is. If you're involved in HR, recruitment, or talent sourcing, or executive search, or whatever it is this is what you have to get right. So let me share them with you, and then we can talk about why the email campaigns are important. So first thing is your brand. How did you find me? You're sitting in the States at the moment. I'm sitting in South Africa. How did you find me to be a guest on your podcast? It's my brand, right? So the first thing is having a strong digital footprint, great online brand. Those kind of things are important. Second is, where are you looking? So let's not go and look where every other recruiter in the world is looking. And I refer to LinkedIn and job boards. Let's go and think out of the box a little bit. And then the third thing is your outreach. What are you saying to people? I mean, please tell me you're not using templated messages, same message to people, zero personalization, all of those things. And for me, if you can crack those 3 things, you're sorted. That's exactly what you're looking for. So to answer your question around, are email campaigns, successful? Why are they successful? It's because I think that we have to have a multi-pronged approach these days to recruiting. It's about finding the people. I mean, the next step is actually finding contact details, phone numbers or email addresses. And I mean, that's a skill in itself. And then sending the message and realizing that we've got to think like marketers. It's a campaign here. It's not a once-off email, where a lot of people make the mistake of that first email is the whole TLDR, because it is too long. And then your second and third, what have you actually got to say? But did you get my first email? It was quite long. Did you read it? You haven't got much to say in emails 2 or 3. But if you think like a marketer, basically what happens then is that you start sending that information from the very long first email across like 5 or 6 emails. So basically, you are drip feeding information to your candidates and your clients, which works way better than bombarding them with a really long email up front.
Yes. And it's always interesting to me how much we can learn in talent acquisition from marketers and how much we as an industry neglect to learn from them. They are marketing to people. We are marketing to people. So there's a lot to learn about how marketers do things and a lot that we can adapt into what we do in our day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's becoming like a little bit of a gray line, blurred line, isn't it? Between what does marketing do in a company? What does talent acquisition do? Because, I mean, we're all marketing to get more people on board.
Yeah, we just have different audiences. So, do you have any stories? I know you've been doing this for a while and you've worked with a lot of companies. Do you have any stories about a time when an email campaign helped you or someone that you know connect with a hard to reach candidate?
So I've got lots of stories. I mean, I don't have one that's really springing out to mind now, but I will tell you what does spring to mind when I think about email campaigns. And I always emphasize this in my training, is that I always say, put your candidates or your clients into a 4 or 5 email campaign. So there's 4 or 5 emails. But the key thing is that last email, it has to be your Dear John. Now, those of us who were around, in the 80s, Rona, I don't know if you remember this. Dear John was that sitcom. And the person, his wife or girlfriend broke up with him by leaving him a Dear John note on top of the fireplace one day. And, off she went. You have to, as a recruiter, tell that candidate that this is the last email that you are sending them. So it's your Dear John email. You're breaking up with them. So saying things like, I realize that you are super busy. Everything's obviously going all right in your job. You don't need my services. This is going to be the last email that I'm going to send to you, but you are welcome to stay in touch. And if you've written a good email campaign and you've given them lots of information and they've enjoyed it, that is the email that they answer. So a lot of the times you've got to get to, that second or even third week in your email campaign before you start getting answers from people. And that for me is always a really good tip.
So how can recruiters craft emails that go beyond just the job description and actually connect with candidates on a personal level?
So there's a couple of things there, but the first thing that I actually really recommend is don't just go and reach out to a candidate after looking at their LinkedIn profile, because you don't get all of the information that you want to actually use in your reach out campaign from LinkedIn. I mean, I found that I have to give a good Google search for someone to find out things like, oh, wait, hold on, they also run this community, or maybe they wrote this book, or they were a guest on this blog, or they were a guest on someone's podcast that you could have listened to. It's about Googling that person before you actually reach out so that you can mention something that they've done. Maybe you were at the same event. Maybe you've got friends in common. For me, that's really, really important because you want to really up your personalization. So I'm not meaning go onto Facebook and say things like, hey, I saw your daughter turned 1 this weekend. That's amazing. I hope the party was good. Like, that's freaky stuff. Like, you don't want that. But I mean, if you've got kids, you can always say something like, I'm just out to do the school run, or, just be personable. They've got kids, they understand. So for me, that's really, really important, is that you've got to do a little bit of research. Yes, it does take longer, but it does help. And that for me is what is important, is that you've got to make that connection with someone. So I always advocate to have a 50% template. Because, like what you're telling them about the job and the company, that potentially won't change. You need to tweak it a little bit to why that's a good move for them. But the information about the company, their mission and values, their CSI or CSR, whatever it is pretty bog standard. But the rest of the email, the other 55%, it's really important that you then make sure that the person knows that you've done your homework about them. I mean, isn't it better to reach out to someone and say, I listened to your podcast, or there was a fantastic presentation that you gave, straight away before, I came across your CV on LinkedIn.
As you're saying this, I always remember this LinkedIn. It was a LinkedIn message that I sent to someone everyone on the team had tried to reach out to her. We really wanted her because she was a community leader in the city that we were recruiting for. And we knew the chances of getting her were pretty low, but the way she was connected were high. And when I Googled her, everyone was just looking at her LinkedIn. When I Googled her, I realized she had just come back from a trip to Panama, where I'm from. And she had this whole blog post about the angry honking. Driving in Panama is very interesting, and honking is a way of communication when driving. I think the subject line was like, we're not all angry honkers, I promise. And she replied to my email within minutes. She's like, I rarely reply to recruiters. And I knew because my entire team had tried to reach out. And she said, the fact that you took the time to read one of my non-technical blogs is what made me interested in replying to your message. Just normal
Fantastic.
Human interaction 101.
Exactly, Rhoda, 100%. And what a brilliant example. And well done to you. I mean, that was very clever, to throw in the Panama as well. I mean, that's brilliant. And look, you got a response. And that's what I'm talking about, is that you're always going to find something where there's a connection, people get out and about these days. So you can always refer to something, because again, I mean, all of the other recruiters that you're competing against are literally starting with, I came across your profile on LinkedIn.
What types of content have you found are the most effective in engaging candidates through email?
Authentic content. So I don't think that you need to be lying. I had an example with a team that I was training, and they were trying to get this guy's attention that they also wanted on their team. They were talking about how this person was running. There's a big race here in South Africa called Comrades, and it's an ultra marathon. And they started talking running to them. Now, the person didn't do any running, the recruiter. So what happened was, is kind of long story short, the guy got the role at the company. The company had quite it was a big company. They had a running club or whatever. And then he managed to, he kept on saying to the recruiter, come, you spoke about how you'd go running, and I want you to join the running club with me. And it was very awkward because this person, there was a guy, he wasn't a runner at all. Yet he had played on that side of the human being and had lied and said, I'm a runner. And every time he saw me, he had to develop this chronic limp to say, oh no, I've still got an injury, or, I can't join the running club. And it's just like, that just doesn't work. So for me, it's got to be honest. It's got to be authentic. And I think you've got to understand the person you're reaching out to's position. I mean, think about it. A DevOps architect must get, 10 emails a day from recruiters, so play on that. I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing from recruiters. And yes, I am just another recruiter, but what I'm offering you is what I'm sure no other recruiters are offering you, something along those lines.
It's such a great tip. Lying really isn't going to get you anywhere, because at the end of the day, your goal is to hire this person. They will potentially work at the same company as you do if you're internal. That's so awkward and so weird that you would lie. And I'm sure the candidate is left thinking, what else did they lie about?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know, having been internal, I mean, you see these people around the office, you see them at all of the office functions, and yeah, you've got to be honest, because especially as an internal, I mean, we all know you are that ambassador for the organization. So, you can't, fake it every day and say, oh, I'm having such a wonderful day and come and work for us. This is the best place to work. But, you've got to be positive about where you work, right?
Yeah, but you have to share the truth. And I always tell people, there's going to be someone out there that likes the things about this company, whether they're not so great or not. You work there. Hundreds or maybe thousands of other people work there. So just find the people that are okay with the reality of what your company is. And you can showcase that since the beginning, since the first interaction. That recruiter, I mean, yeah, I hate running personally. I would have said to someone, hey, I see that you're a runner. We have a running club. Me personally, am not the biggest fan of running, but I admire anyone who runs, or just something like that. Talking about what they like, piquing their interest, but you don't have to lie and say you're a runner.
Yeah, no, exactly, 100%. So for me, yeah, that's the trick. It's about building that rapport from the very first kind of interaction. I read such an interesting thing today. I was reading an article about, candidate reach out, and it was about every sentence that you write, you want to encourage them to be going on to read the next sentence. Every sentence has to count, and that's really important.
And that's a good segue into my next question, which is, what are some creative ways to personalize your email outreach so that you can stand out in a crowded inbox? Because we know everyone's inbox is crowded.
So first of all, the big one, and also I was reading in this article today, it's your subject lines. You've got to make sure that you got your number of characters right. It went into a lot of detail about people generally are opening their emails on their mobile devices these days. People are more attached to their mobile phones than they are to their laptop. So that's a big one. So the first one is you've got to get their subject line right. What works for me is putting the person's name in there, but not in like a salesy kind of way, asking a question. So there's a question mark, so people almost feel compelled to go and open the email and read it, is another one. But I think what we do tend to forget is that, we have a whole lot of color that we can use in our email, and everyone sends their emails in black and white. So, if I go and do my research on someone and I see, like for me, for an example, I'm a vegetarian, I love being outdoors, I love nature, I'm a green person, okay? So why don't you put the text of your email in green? Why don't you put a paragraph in green, a couple of words, that you really want to draw out? Use bullet points, use emojis, use different fonts if you have to. It's all about being different, because most emails we get these days, if they're not advertising in an HTML format, they're pretty boring, So I think that's a big one, is just livening up the look and feel. A lot of people put too much in those emails. The shorter, the better. The shorter the emails, actually, within reason, get a good response. In my email campaign, just to share with you, my third email is generally always a meme. So something along the lines of no response, are you frozen? One of those that go out, especially if that's, mom of daughters, or, they get it. But yeah, funny ones for developers, software engineers, those kind of things. You can make your own memes these days if you want to throw in their names. It's thinking differently. And then also things like, I'm not one of those people that have on my email signature the link to my Calendly, because, it does get brought up and I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the right people. But I think that signature is incredibly powerful. I mean, you could have links there to your job page. One of the things I say in my email signature is that this email was sent at a convenient time for me. Please feel free to respond to it at a convenient time for you. Because, my client base is all over the world. So people are going to get emails from me at like 1, 2 in the morning, because that's just the nature of what it is like. And then at least people know. there's lots of links and there's lots of things you could be doing with your email signature too that will help you to stand up.
Yeah. And anytime I speak to recruiters about personalizing emails, the number one thing I hear, and maybe you've heard it too, is, well, that takes a lot of time. So how do you balance like personalizing and being efficient? Because we are sending lots of emails or reaching out to lots of candidates.
Absolutely, Rona, and I completely agree. And I hear it all the time in my training too. But Van, this is going to take forever. And I think that you've got to think about, what are you recruiting for? I mean, if you're searching for a Java architect versus a call center agent, I mean, which one are you going to personalize? Which one are you going to spend more time on? And I think that that's what we've got to realize. And you've also got to take into account how busy you are. Don't get me wrong, the old spray and pray method of posting an advert. Also, if it's for a junior role and you're doing bulk recruitment, that's great. But I'm talking about, those more specialized roles, the hard to fill roles, the one that you were talking about earlier, they just need a little bit more care and attention. And I think you need to decide that based on where you recruit, what you're recruiting for, and your volumes, how busy you are. But I think if you get into the habit of it, Rona, to be honest with you, it actually becomes quite quick. And that's why I say, have that 50% template already, and then you can just add in the personalization.
Yeah, templates aren't bad. I think what's bad is sending the exact same template to everyone, whether it applies to them or not. But using a template is just a smart way of being efficient with your time. What are some common mistakes that you see recruiters and TA folks do when it comes to email outreach?
So one thing that I see is that it's just outreach in general, is that there's a whole thing of desperation. So within 5 minutes, the person's got a LinkedIn email from them. They have an email, they've got a missed call on their phone, and they have a WhatsApp or a Telegram or a Signal or a Facebook Messenger. It's like too much, okay? Calm down. This isn't going to work. So that's what I see happening, is that it's we're so keen, we're so desperate to get a hold of them. We need to learn how to spread those things out. Other things that I see, which is terrible. I received one last week, actually, my name spelled wrong. Sometimes I have the incorrect name. And at the moment, what is raising its ugly head is a lot of AI generated content, especially when I know the person and I know how they speak. I know which country they come from. And I'm like, I'm sure this wasn't written by that person. I know how they express themselves, things like that. So for me, those are like the obvious ones. Everyone has got the ability to take, text, run it through Zero GPT and, get it to do the analysis for it and see, who generated this. And yeah, for me, it's a frustrating thing that's happening far too often.
How do you leverage data and metrics to refine and improve email campaign performance?
So that's a really interesting question. So I obviously use an email reach out tool. So when I'm doing this, I'll be honest, I use a tool called Sourcewell. I think that they are really good and they do all the measuring and the metrics for me, because before that, I was doing what most recruiters do and I wasn't measuring. Because how do you keep track of every single email that leaves your inbox as a recruiter? And I think that you raise a very valid point. The data's there. We need the metrics. For me, if you look at LinkedIn, they put out their annual report and they said their average response rate of in-mails was 20%. And I'm like, well, that's just not good enough. And it got me thinking about, email campaigns. A tool that's very common in the US is Gem. They also do outreach campaigns. A lot of the tools like, your Hire Easies, they also have inbuilt campaigns now to their software. So there's actually no excuse for not measuring. And I think it's good to have a little bit of a healthy competition within your team. What is the average open rates? What are the average response rates? And it just actually makes it a whole lot more interesting, because otherwise you're actually just shooting in the dark, aren't you? You're like sending out emails, you're trying your best, but you don't actually really know what works. And that's why I like this whole thing about A/B testing. You've got a subject line, A/B test, which one's going to get a higher open rate. That's also important. And now we have the ability to do it, which is amazing.
Yeah, I love A/B testing, subject lines, and just all of the things that using an email tool can give you. Beyond open rates, are there any other metrics that you look at when it comes to emails?
Definitely open rates versus response rates, because then you know that your message is landing. Other metrics would be which email's getting the response. So, actually, maybe I need to pull that email into earlier on in my campaign. And also other metrics like, what time is the most popular that the emails are open? That's also a big one. Which day is most popular? I always say that if you're sending an email campaign and you've got someone on their Gmail, make sure one of those emails lands on a Saturday or Sunday, because that's when a lot of people do check their Gmail addresses over the weekend. So I think that there's lots of learnings that we could take from a single email campaign.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot you can learn. Do you recommend sending the emails like every day? Let's say I have a 5 email campaign. Do you recommend sending one every day, once a week, over 5 weeks? Like, what's the frequency that you've seen works?
So I actually have one set up that actually works to be over 2.5 weeks. So I don't send every day. I think that that's not great. As I say, one of them must land on a weekend, but definitely 2 to 3, sometimes 4 days in between. So my first 1 to 4, normally do about 2 or 3 days, mix it up a bit. And then my last one, I normally leave about 4 or 5 days, and then they get the Dear John kind of breakup email. And it doesn't have to be work days. It's just a couple of days in between. Yeah, and also, I do kind of think about public holidays and things like that. I try not to send emails, especially on religious holidays. Sometimes it's not your religion, so you forget. So, yeah, it's a couple of things to think about.
Yeah, a lot to think about. How can TA folks use email to build genuine relationships with potential candidates, even if they're not the right fit today, but just to build those future pipeline relationships?
So I think it's always good to be honest. If the person isn't right for the job today, they could be right for the job tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, or whatever it is. You want to stay in touch. And a lot of people do their sales pitch and they say, well, we've got over 1,000 candidates or 10,000 candidates or 100,000 candidates on our CRM or our ATS, whatever it is. And for me, the first thing that goes through my mind is, well, that's a candidate graveyard. Because if you're not keeping in touch with people, you're not keeping that information updated, it's no use. I'd rather have a network. So one of the things I do is if I'm, chatting with the individual and they're not suitable now, is I always just get them into my LinkedIn network, because that's where I'm most active. I try and post on there 3 times a week, but also to try and automate from, again, my ATS or my CRM system to send them, do you want to sign up for the monthly hot jobs, or, make sure there's an email going out saying, do you want to update your details? Make sure that you're following all of the data privacy. We've got GDPR, we've got POPI Act, whatever it is all over the world, that you're compliant with those. It's a good excuse to actually keep in touch with people. But, yeah, I just think that it's a bit of a waste that now that person goes and sits in an ATS never to be heard of again. So it's generating interesting campaigns. But the best thing, and what I've been focusing on a lot this year, is think about setting up a community. Don't put those people into an ATS or a CRM, put them into like a circle community or a heartbeat or whatever it is, and keep interacting with them. Get some conversations going. That is far more effective.
Yeah, so many people think of a talent pipeline as this collection of contact information that you never reach out to until you need them. And that's literally not how networking works.
You're so right. You hit the nail on the head. You've got to keep these people warm instead of, and that's why I laugh, because, that's how a lot of people treat LinkedIn, is that, you don't know the person from a bar soap. You've never met them, but we all immediately think LinkedIn is like a monster or a job board or something, and we just assume everyone's on the market. So yeah, you raised a very good point.
What advice would you give to recruiters and talent sourcers who are looking to take and just start using email campaigns?
For me, the best advice is always do your campaign up front. So meet with your clients, take your brief, know exactly what's going on, ask the questions about the company. Because say, for example, email 4's about CSI, CSR, or, you want to find out more about that. Where can you find the photos? Are they on the website? Where can you link to? Is it on a YouTube channel, et cetera, et cetera. So, you've got to have all of that information. So before I even start sourcing, I actually put that 50% template together so that it's there, it's ready, because you get into the flow of things, you're finding people, and now you're trying to write an email campaign at the same time. That's frustrating. That doesn't work. So my advice is to get those email campaigns up and running. Again, you can use the same kind of campaign, the same template for the same company. You've just got to maybe mix it up, add in your personalization. It's all about staying streamlined. You don't want to be reinventing the wheel every single time. So I actually use OneNote for this. And I have a whole lot of OneNote pages, one for each client, and I have all of the email campaigns that are sent out over there.
OneNote is one of my favorite tools, and it's been with me since college. I've seen the evolution of OneNote, but I'm such a fan of it, and it's so underutilized, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I talk to recruiters about this in my training, like, what's OneNote? I'm like, just download it, use it.
Yeah. So if listeners want to learn more about you and about your training, which is awesome, how can they connect with you?
Sure, Rona, I always say that I'm not difficult to find, right? I am on all pretty much social platforms. I have my own YouTube channel. It's Van_Roth. I'm on X, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. So wherever they are comfortable, they can track me down. My website is VANESSARoth.com. And if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I'm quite happy to send you a link back. I have got 3 sets of free training now on my online academy. I am more than happy to give you the links to all of those courses, and go and get stuck in. I mean, one of my sayings in life is ABL, always be learning, and it's something that I really stick to. So get involved.
Perfect. And I'll also add those links to your courses and how to connect with you to the show notes. Excellent. This has been such a great conversation and such a timely one, because I do think, especially in the summertime now for the US and Europe, email is a really good way to get a hold of candidates.
Absolutely, 100%. So thank you for having me, Rona. I appreciate being a guest amongst all of the other esteemed guests that you've had on your show, and I really wish you every success. You're amazing.
That wraps up my conversation with Vanessa. Thanks again for being on the show. Today's conversation is a reminder that email campaigns are still a powerful tool in recruiting. Remember, as Vanessa says, always be learning. Keep refining your strategies, and don't be afraid to think outside the box when it comes to talent sourcing. If you want to learn from Vanessa herself how to use the entire internet to find talent that no one else can find, be sure to check out academy.vanessaroth.com. You'll find all of Vanessa's courses and a bunch of free resources to help you level up your sourcing game. The link is in the show notes. And if you want to learn how to get the best talent to contact you and increase your response rates, listen to episode 12, where Anna Morgan shares how to build a personal brand that will transform your recruiting career. Thanks for listening, and I'll chat with you next week.